In this video presentation, what we're going to discuss is how to calculate utility, marginal utility, and how we can illustrate via the Cardinal utility theory how consumers maximize their utility or achieve consumer equilibrium. Okay, so that's what we're going to be looking at in this particular video presentation. Cardinal utility theory. Before we actually show some actual calculations, it's important to go over our definitions of what marginal utility is and total utility is. Now, utility is the satisfaction a person gets when they consume a good or service. Now, many times we may consume different servings or units of a good. For instance, if you're looking at a pizza, someone may calculate the units of the serving as one slice as a unit. So if you have a box of pizza and there are 12 slices, then if you eat 3 slices, then you had 3 units from this box of pizza. Okay, so what we're looking at simply is the satisfaction that you as an individual receive when you consume units of a good or a service. So let's move on. So utility looks at the satisfaction that a person receives. And therefore, every time you consume an additional unit of a good, you will get an additional utility derived from that new unit. Therefore, the utility that you receive per unit of a good that you consume is what we term as marginal utility. I say again, marginal utility is the utility you receive per unit of a good that you consume. Alright? And therefore, what we can do at the end of the day is simply add up the values that you receive per unit consumed. So if you go back to our pizza example, if you consumed 5 slices of the pizza, and therefore from each slice of pizza that you eat, you would have received a certain amount of satisfaction per slice, then you can add up the satisfaction that you derived over the 5 slices that you ate, and that will be your total utility. So your total utility is the addition or the summation of the utility or the satisfaction that you derive as a consumer from the total number of the units of a good or service that you consume. An understanding of these definitions are very important when we are trying to calculate utilities. Now, in this particular example, what we have here is clothing on this side here, and then we have shoes. The price of clothing is 50, while the price of shoes is 100. And what we're simply going to look at is calculating the total utility in this for clothing. We're going to learn to calculate the total utility, and then we're going to learn to calculate marginal utility for shoes. We're going to leave out this particular column here, which is mu over p, and I'm going to explain all of these variables for you. So let's give this some perspective. So you as an individual, what we're saying is that when you purchase a unit of clothing, you know, you're going shopping, you're buying a shirt or a top, you would tell yourself that when you purchase that particular unit, it will give you some measure of satisfaction. So you go shopping for the day. And what we are assuming is that you can place a value, a numerical value, for each unit of clothing that you purchase. Because when you purchase something, you don't purchase it to be dissatisfied. You purchase a good or a service simply because it gives you some measure of satisfaction when you utilize it. So therefore, what we're saying here, under the clothing column, so let me tell you the labels. The Q here stands for the quantities. So this is 1 unit of clothing, this is 2 units of clothing, 3 and so forth as we go down. The MU column means marginal utility, and we defined that earlier. This column here is your total utility column, and then this column here is your marginal utility divided by price column, and we're going to omit this column for the while being, and we're going to come to that later on. So what we're saying here, that you as an individual, when you purchased your first unit of clothing, the value that you assigned, all right, in terms of satisfaction for that first unit, we say is 120. For the second piece of clothing that you purchase, you assign a new value of 190. For the third unit, you assign a new value of 250. So what we observe here is that you as an individual, as you purchase more and more units of clothing, that your utility derived per unit, therefore your marginal utility, was rising. We realized up until the 8th unit of clothing that you purchased, your marginal utility was rising throughout from 120, 190, 250, and it went as high as 400, a numerical value of 400 for the 8th unit you purchased. But it seems here after the 8th unit, from the 9th unit to the 15th unit, your satisfaction began dropping. And what we can say is that maybe you have reached a point whereby you're still purchasing clothing, but you're telling yourself, I'm just doing it because maybe it's my habit. I usually purchase a lot of clothing, but the satisfaction I'm getting from each new unit I purchase is getting less and less. Because we fall from 400 to 300 to 250, and we reach a point of 0 on the 14th piece of clothing that you purchase, and you reach even a negative value. So we realize that after you purchase the 15th unit of clothing, you actually got dissatisfied. I mean, you purchased it, but you're dissatisfied. So maybe we can call this our buyer's remorse. A negative value of 100 connotates that there is buyer's remorse being experienced by this particular individual. Now, how do we calculate total utility, therefore, for clothing? Remember we said that marginal utility is the utility we get per unit. So the first clothing purchased gave you a value of 120. The second unit purchased gave you a value of 190. So therefore, the total utility after the first unit of clothing purchased will be 120. Okay? The total utility after the second will be 120 minus 190, which gives you 310. So you realize here after the first unit you have 120. The second unit purchased gave you 190 individually. So therefore when you add 120 and 190 you get 310. Okay? And we could go on to the third unit purchased gave you 250. So overall the 3 units in total will give you 310, the previous figure, the previous total utility figure, plus the new utility derived, that'll be 310, plus 250, which gives us a value of 560. And we could continue our calculation throughout. Okay? So there are 3 ways to look at it. Well, sorry, 2 ways to look at it. You could say, after the third unit consumed, you had 250, so you could say 120 plus 190 plus 250, and then it gives you a value of 560. But remember, we calculated the total utility up to the second unit so far. So all you need to do is add 310 plus 250 gives you 560. So the total utility for the fourth unit is going to be 560 plus 300 gives you 860. And that's how we go along. We move along and that's how we get our value. That's how we get our values for total utility. Okay? As I said, we're going to leave out this column for the while being. With regards to the shoes, remember, if the total utility column simply looks at the changes in marginal utility, it's very easy to calculate the marginal utility column. For the first unit, your marginal utility for shoes will be 260 because before you consumed, your total utility would have been 0. So therefore, if your total utility would have been 0 before you consumed your first unit, it therefore means that the marginal utility after your first unit is going to be 260. Okay? Also, your marginal utility that you get, or the unit you get from the second unit consumed, right? The utility you get from the second unit consumed is going to be 640 minus 260. Simply because if your total utility was 260 before, and it's now 640, it means you will add it a value of 380. 260 plus the 280 will give you 640. Alright, so I'll say this again. If you have a total utility of 640, and the total utility before was 260, it means 640 minus 260 gives you a value of 380. And we continue this process until we fill out our marginal utility column. So I hope this explanation was clear as how we can calculate marginal utility and total utility.